Welcome everybody to another episode of Welcome everybody to another episode of Tell Me Everything Frog Girl Fridays. I'm your host, Danielle Spinelli. I feel like I almost got that down packed except for that little blooper in the beginning. Anyways, I got Rod on with us. Really great that he came on. I actually talked to him about a cargo theft that he was working on, seeing what information I can help him with, and then also pinged me on LinkedIn, told me about some other new stuff and things like that. So cool to kind of get a pulse check. It's kind of what this month's about is pulse check on cargo theft. I'm hoping we can do enough education this year and enough preventative steps as an industry to make that curve go down, because I was hoping 2025 was the year, but it spiked way up. So let's try to get a hold of everything. Anyways, let's jump in it. Thanks so much for coming on, Rod. If you would take a second and just kind of introduce yourself, kind of what you do, and then we'll jump right into everything.
Hi, I'm Rod Fullenwider, Vice President of D&L Protective Services here in Dallas, and just glad to be here with Danielle to see where we take this today.
Yeah, thanks so much for hopping on. I really appreciate it. I know you messaged me on LinkedIn. You're like, we got to talk about cargo theft. I'm like, music to my ears, all things cargo theft. Fortunately, it's not like the best topic, I guess, to talk about, but it is it's interesting. It's kind of fun getting like detective and investigative, and every time I get somebody on like LinkedIn messaging me saying that they had a new cargo theft trend, I'm like, let's talk about it. So, anyways, happy you're on here. And, yeah, what are you seeing, I guess, on your end, with the things that you do?
Yeah, we're seeing a number of things. One, we're seeing, of course, the fake manifest and how good the crooks have gotten at being able to change manifest and quite frankly, using very legitimate drivers to steal whole loads, and those drivers have no idea that what they've done is illegal and usually broken multiple crimes.
Right.
So that's there, and I think the advent of AI and the cyber world, of course, is making that even more of a challenge out there. So it's a big issue, but that still doesn't take away from the traditional forms of cargo theft, which our criminal element is still out there doing, and many of them are staying low tech, and it's working really good for them, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, because we've been talking about the strategic cargo theft for a while, theft by deception and fraud and things like that. That's kind of the big one, because that's kind of the newest thing. But I think you're right. We definitely forget about the straight theft and, go into a truck stop and having your truck broken into, or what, I guess, what are some things that you've seen, just as I'm sure it's the same thing as what's been going on for years, but I definitely think it's important to talk about.
Yes, some of it is, and some of it's got some different nuances. I think part of it is, you have where some of these criminals, they're hitting specific types of goods, and that's where they feel most comfortable because that's what they have the ability to sell and move when it's over, all said and done, right?
Uh-huh.
Then you have others who they're going to steal whatever they get their hands on, and they're following a truck from a truck stop, and they're saying, where's the opportunity to hit him and steal? Some are going to use weapons, some are not using weapons. It's quite interesting, and so
Yeah.
when we get brought in, it's because companies have had one of two things. They've either had a series of cargo thefts, and they're saying, how do we solve it? We need private investigators, we need surveillance, we need different tools that, one, they shouldn't do themselves, and or two, they can't do themselves. Or number two, we're brought in because they can't get law enforcement to respond fast enough. And that's not against law enforcement. It's that many of these criminals are hitting across various jurisdictions, and they're doing it really, really quick. And as a
Right.
result, you have a problem of, well, who's on first, and who's gonna play, and who's gonna go after these guys. And well, gosh, the X or Y or Z, you only had one part of a truck stolen in nowhere USA, but 30 miles away they hit again, and then 40 miles away they hit again, but they're all in different cities and jurisdictions. And so it creates a real challenge. Those are the times we're being generally brought in. Or there's the third one, I guess, would be where you have that carrier or the insurance company who's saying, all right, now we have a trend. We see the trend, we know what the trend is. We just don't know who they are. Let's bring in some other resources and see if we can't tag them and bag them. And that's the stuff that we're normally brought into, which is sometimes very interesting and always a lot of
Uh-huh.
pressure, because at that point people are having people up top that are saying, we want answers, we want solutions, and we want them yesterday.
Yeah. It definitely. It's funny, I'd actually just heard of one today where it was a little copper. The carrier claims that they had their email hacked, and the brokerage, though, they did all the calling and the verification, call the FMCSA phone number, "Hey, does so and so work on here?" and this and that. Had a signed rate confirmation come back from a different email, so the actual dispatch email, and then they even had the extensions being rerouted, and then who showed up is the actual truck. To me, I think the carrier is actually in on it. That's me. Why? How did all those pieces actually fall into play? Carrier is claiming they didn't. That's the case. But I mean, at like a copper place or at this particular place, they do fingerprints, they do all that. So I know you mentioned like in the beginning, a lot of times the drivers don't know that they're committing a crime, or they don't realize that they're having to cross dock and do this, or they're involved in something. And so I guess as far as whenever you're talking to drivers, because I'm sure you a lot sometimes they do take their license plate and you end up talking to them. What are some like big stories that you hear, or things that we can educate carriers on? I'm like, hey, if you hear these red flags, you should definitely be checking for like extra verification.
Yeah, I think, also while on the copper, let's not forget that copper theft is up by 10%, last year over the previous year. And so it's
Mhm.
still happening in, a lot of big ways, and it's happening in bad ways because some of that copper that's being stolen is, causing major effects in ways that people don't even see. So
Yeah.
so it's a big one that people don't think is a problem, but it is. We're seeing, like, we worked a case this last year, and it was, not just one carrier, it was 3 carriers being hit by the same group, and they were hitting them in both Northern and in Southern California, which, quite
Mm.
frankly, we've seen people hit Northern California and people hit Southern, but not a lot of groups over the years that have hit both.
Yeah.
And this group was hitting both on a really bizarre, weird schedule. No one could figure it out. We literally looked at the movements of the moon. We looked at, weather patterns, and we looked at, all kinds of data processing, and nothing came back. And there was a reason for that.
Mm.
These guys were stealing based upon their normal work and their day-to-day job. And their day-to-day job had them
Gotcha.
moving between both Northern and Southern California. But
Mm.
they were hitting multiple carriers. And what we found is in one of the carriers, what they decided to do is, let's put armed protection on that load to follow the load and all that. And what happened there is where these guys had projected that they might have guns, but never really showed them. In this case, when the carrier showed up and did have the armed protection, these guys did brandish their weapons against the
Oh
security
wow.
guard. Yeah, put him against the wall, took his gun, and still took the load. Right, and what they were taking partial loads. They were taking cigarettes, is what they were taking, and they were
Mm.
taking cartons of cigarettes because a carton of cigarettes in California is typically going to sell between 85 and $105 a carton. I don't know what it
Yeah.
sells for in Atlanta. In Dallas, it's gonna be a little less than that, but it's still expensive.
Yeah.
These particular criminals then turned around and sold it at $65 a carton. So they were saving people $25 to $30 a head, but their profit is pure because they have no overhead.
Right. Right.
Anyway, so we're still seeing that, and we're seeing, I think what we've seen over the last really 10, 12 years is we've seen a shift in what the priority items that are being taken. Before, 10, 12, 15 years ago, electronics was, top of the heap, as was
Yeah.
household products for repairs, shingles and 2 by 4s and all. They're still on the list, but now groceries is top of the list.
Yeah, which is wild.
It
Yeah.
is, and ironically, over the years, we've not seen pharmaceutical goods be high on the cargo theft, and I think that really speaks to the people in the pharmaceutical industry and some of the security measures they've put in place. Of course, they also have the DEA and DEA requirements on a lot of your pharmaceutical goods, which helps also the protection of that as well.
Right.
But yeah, we've seen a shift now, and that shift seems to have come in place about the time COVID hit, and that trend seems to be staying at least right now. Just like we continue to see, the hot states, California, my home state of Texas, unfortunately, New Jersey, Illinois, and
Mhm.
Florida. Those really have been the top 5 for a long time, and
Right.
they continue to be. Of course, that's also, if you look at the highways and byways of the world going north and south and east and west, they're major thoroughfares, and therefore it makes it easy places to happen. But I think we're seeing more of these criminals also saying, there's a truck stop. We're going to target from a truck stop, or we're going to target from a racetrack or a QT or a 7-Eleven or whatever, and we'll follow these trucks and we'll see where they go. But they also have
Yeah.
today the technology where they can put a tracker, on a rig and then pick and choose. where they wanna hit a load.
Hmm.
So, technology, is working for the criminals, but old school is also working for these criminals.
Right. That's
Yeah.
interesting with the trackers, which makes sense. I mean, we use them for protection, but of course they everything we use for protection, they counter with bad stuff, it seems like.
Yeah, but there's some
Yeah.
items that even with trackers, it's really impossible to use. Cigarettes is one of those. Game
Mhm.
cards, for sports cards, real hard to use a tracker on those type items,
Eh,
and the criminals know that. Ironically, the cargo theft case that we did with the cigarettes, we did use trackers, but we had to get creative in how we used the trackers, and we used Apple tags, quite frankly, on part of it, which worked, except
yeah.
law enforcement doesn't like Apple tags, and therefore
Interesting.
they were reluctant to be involved when we started using them.
Hmm.
But they
Interesting.
proved very successful.
Yeah. And there's so many different brands out there right now, but I think the biggest thing is making sure that the type of tracker has the different ways to connect because obviously, especially like in California, there's so much desert and Arizona is like that too. Those are big hot spots, Texas. And so I think having the trackers where they can hit the cell towers, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, like the three different, I guess, methods that are out there. I think that's crucial when people are buying trackers is to think about can this happen in these three ways, just in case if there something does go, you know, in a weird spot or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the problem with the AirTags is the AirTags, you literally have to be right on top of them in order
Right.
to really for them to be successful, and therein lies the challenge for both the private sector as well as for law enforcement.
Right.
Hey, we know there are trackers, and in this case, the cigarettes, for instance, we knew we had the AirTags in some of the cartons of cigarettes, but not all of them. They happened to be
Mhm.
some of the ones that were stolen. And we had the ability to track them to, in this case, an apartment complex in Oakland. But then
Okay.
you have 7 apartments. Which apartment is it in?
Yeah.
And we literally had to send a private investigator in under a guise to figure out exactly which apartment it was. So it's a lot of old school, boots on the ground, beat the feet type stuff. Still works, but you have to be really, really careful so people don't get hurt.
Right. I was gonna say these guys don't want you taking anything, and they are getting more violent, it seems like. I think they were violent back in the day, and then it kinda slowed down with the strategic theft, and they realized they can do it without even being in the US, and then I do see a trend where it's going back to being a little bit more violent, which is super scary
Well,
on
and
that
they're
front.
a lot more organized today, the groups.
Mhm.
Some of them loosely organized, some of them extremely organized. There's a case we just worked Christmas Eve day, in fact, in that particular group, there have been 12 arrested on that case already. There's 8 warrants out on 8 other people, and those warrants go anywhere from here all the way to Saudi Arabia. So,
Oh, wow.
very well financed group, very high tech in what they're doing, and the skids are greased well. So, it makes for a tough burden to go after some of these folks, if you will.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And so with doing like the cigarettes or whatever, I mean, really that's like you said, DEA, like that's like a, that to me is more should be taken more seriously by law enforcement than like a load of Kraft mac and cheese or whatever. And it's interesting because I keep referring to an attack on our supply chain because we were deemed essential during COVID. To me, an attack on our supply chain is an attack on national security. That's what I keep saying and pushing and trying to get across the board and letting people know that this is a lot more serious than just money getting lost or goods being lost. It can really disrupt the whole supply chain. But whenever you're dealing with law enforcement and you're saying like, hey, this is what's going on, this and this, is it like certain goods where they kind of take more seriously, or is it kind of just depends on where you're at or your relationship with the law enforcement officer?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah, it really is. It's tough. Like, I'll tell you, California Highway Patrol is phenomenal.
Hmm.
They're a great, great group, and I think most of law enforcement wants to help. They wanna support. However, they're overburdened,
Yeah.
they're underpersoned, and you have a process where your law enforcement officer on the street, whether they be city or county or whatever, they also understand and face, "Is my district attorney going to prosecute
Yeah.
this? Are they going to move this forward? Do they care?" Right?
Yeah.
And then you get in, like, this particular case in the Bay Area, for instance, we literally had, 22 different cities that were
Mm.
involved, okay? Now, one of our bad guys, oh, by the way, and I've got a picture if you wanna see it at some point, one of our bad guys literally, and he's one of the ringleaders, did us the benefit of wearing an ankle monitor issued by the great county of
Interesting.
San Francisco, and Alameda County is who had him issued. We brought that to the attention of law enforcement very early in the investigation. It took them 4 months to figure out who he was, and by that time we'd already figured it out. And,
Yeah.
but the good news there was once we knew they had it, it became one of the beacons, if you will, that tied the Northern and Southern California group together for over 30 different hits.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this is a group that took over $3 million worth of goods, okay?
Yeah.
So, across 3 carriers.
That we know about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that we know of, exactly.
Right.
And so that's some of what we're up against, is law enforcement wants to do it. In this case, you had, we'd approached the feds early, and typical thing of, well, your dollar amount's not high enough. My thing was in the conversation with them is they've hit over 100. In this case, they'd hit over 100 times across
Wow.
across 3 carriers over many months. And I was looking at it back to the standpoint of the more times they hit, the higher the likelihood we're going to move to a point of violence in this
Mhm.
thing, which puts us closer to actually death of somebody. And it could be intentional or accidental, but the more they do that, the higher the likelihood of violence. And the feds were like, "Yeah, sorry, sorry,
Yeah,
sorry."
until they do.
Yeah, and they did finally get involved whenever we did the first of 4 recoveries. And then, of course, everybody and their mother wanted to play and be part of this
Yeah.
thing, right? But California Patrol did the recovery,
Good.
and did an amazing job. And we took a lot of guys off the
Yeah.
street, right? And we got money back and a lot of product back. And of course, like typical cargo theft, we knew what they were stealing from us and these carriers. But in the recovery, there was also a great deal of retail goods that were taken from at least 3 other major brands in this country. And
Interesting.
yeah, and the bad guys had that as well.
Yeah, I think it's important too to know that these guys aren't just bad just in logistics cargo theft. Like they do other like kind of like you were talking about to earlier, like they do end up getting violent a lot of times and they'll do whatever it takes to, get the goods where they need, especially unfortunately what I've seen anyways, especially those who are not technically from here and they came over here to commit these type of crimes. A lot of times they're a lot more violent than the ones that are here. That's at least what I've been told and seen, I guess. But I don't know if how statistic wise that is, but that's what it seems like. So I know
Well,
you said you had some stuff. Go ahead. Sorry.
well, it also depends on their experience level.
Yeah.
So, like in the one with the cargo, I mean, with cargo of the cigarettes, um, you had the guys who were stealing the goods, and then you had 2 different, there was a middleman and a middlewoman operating separate of each other. And so you had the
Gotcha.
the original bad guys were keeping some of the goods themselves and selling them on their own. The trackers, and once again, I have shots of all this if you wanna see it, I'm willing to share.
Yeah.
But they were moving it around, and we know exactly where they were moving around, and we were watching. Goodness, I had people having them under surveillance. So not only do we have the
Right.
trackers, we were filming, okay,
Yeah.
and watching them do their movement. But at the same time, the 2 middle people were also operating with major sales of the stolen goods, okay?
Right.
And then we ended up buying a good number of the product back. It's another place where it gets into challenges with law enforcement because, law enforcement wants to have that chain of evidence where a law enforcement officer brought it back. Well, we needed to get this stuff proven
Quickly.
quickly,
Right.
and the only way to do that was if we bought it back ourselves for our client, okay?
Right.
And in this case, with not saying about cigarettes, is you have a tax stamp that says this belongs to X, not to just whoever. And at that
Yeah.
point, you have yet a different crime that's been committed by these folks. So we were able to tie a lot of different elements together and make it work. And of course, with us, being private investigators, we didn't have to have warrants. We didn't have to have all the other elements that law enforcement officers have to have. And that's
Yeah.
and that's for everyone's protection, obviously. And then at some
Right.
point, you turn it all over and you let them run with it. And that usually goes well with most law enforcement agencies around the country. Not all of them, but most of them,
Yeah.
particularly at the city and county and state levels. A little more difficult with the federal level. And they don't like our involvement, okay, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
Yeah. It's funny because I was at the cargo theft summit with Cargo Net and Travelers put on in
With
California.
Scott,
Yeah.
you were hanging out with Scott?
And
I'm so sorry.
yeah, right. I
I
know.
know Scott a long time.
But
Phenomenal guy. Yeah,
he's amazing.
yeah.
And so one of the things it was a prime investigator that asked, he was like, "So what are like ways that we step on toes? Like, do you hate us? Like what's going on here? How do we kind of kumbaya work together?" And part of that too was just they were saying like transparency
Yeah.
and like you said, it was these were at the like state level, state and local levels type thing. So a lot of times it helps that you guys can do different things than they can do quicker. And just as long as it's kind of done in the right way so they can actually use it for prosecuting. Cause that's at the end of the day what they want. And what's interesting is that like a lot of people want the stuff recovered. A lot of times recovery of the goods isn't always there, but it does help build the case to where you can say it equaled this dollar amount. It was this type of organized crime. So like putting them away is like the biggest priority for the police officers. But obviously for the us, we're like we want our goods back so we're not having to pay, X amount of dollars out. But it's interesting.
Yeah, as long as it's goods that you can get back and still sell.
Yeah.
Food product, that's next to impossible, but at least we wanna
Hmm.
get it off the streets so it's not contaminated and create other negative issues for the brand, right?
Yeah.
Other items, tools, electronics, cigarettes, other things, we can get those back. We can put them back in the system. One of the big ones in the chemical industry, for instance, for years has been the polypropylene pellets, little bitty plastic pellets, over 1,000 types, over 1,000 colors. Bad guys
Mm,
like to steal them, anywhere from 80 to $300,000 a trailer, and
it's crazy.
yeah, and if you're any one of the big oil companies, you'll buy that back all day long, so you can because it's still cheaper than remanufacturing it, handling it in manufacturing, distribution, and getting it back out there again.
Hmm.
It's still cheaper than going that process. You know.
It's wild. Yeah. I know sometimes it was an Amazon case. This is kind of before they had they've gotten a lot better about their cargo theft, but they bought back their product that was just stolen. And then little did they know they had bought it back directly from the bad guys and it said their real name and all these things. And it was actually CHP that was like, "Hey, you had all the information and it was stolen and whatever, and you guys just didn't have your SKU numbers, you guys didn't have product numbers, and that was what hurt you guys." So I think they've gotten a lot better though, Amazon, at their thefts and stuff, but they're still getting hit.
Well, and they're so big.
Yeah.
That's the thing. They're an enormous size company, an enormous supply chain all by themselves.
Yeah.
They have every possible way to move it. They have their own airplanes, they have trains, they probably have vehicles none of us know about, and,
Right.
and they're moving every type of goods that there is. I mean, it's imaginable. They're moving it. So, they're gonna be a big target, and they're
Yeah.
gonna have a lot of places where holes can happen and gaps can happen, and people are gonna exploit that. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and so much of the time, there is some type of internal involvement even if it's
Yeah.
indiscreet, even if it's hey, I'm telling my friends over a beer at the bar, man, I tell you what, if I was gonna get somebody, it'd be X, Y, or Z, right?
Right.
And that person listens and says, "Huh, he just gave me a roadmap. I just gotta go fill in some gaps and hey,
Right.
I'm making extra money." And before you
Yeah.
know it, that brilliant person, I say loosely brilliant, goes out there and away they go, right? And they start hitting company whatever for whatever they can get their hands on.
Well, kinda same thing with, like a good carrier sometimes if they'll be at, like, a truck stop talking, shooting, talking shop or whatever, and then they learn, "Oh, you made this much money and you did this and you didn't get caught with this," and
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Sometimes it's just and that's what's hard to try to defend against is the ones that just end up going rogue. It's like, how do you stop that? You would have no idea. So, sometimes I think they get bought and they hide it well enough, but sometimes people just turn bad sometimes, and those are really hard to defend against.
Well, there are people who come up bad, and
Yeah.
we don't wanna admit that, we don't like that, but, I mean, there's a friend of mine at Walmart, and he's been a loss prevention manager there for, I don't know, I think since Noah or Moses, as far as I can guess, and
Yeah.
I know that he told me one day that he is on his 3rd generation of shoplifters from the same family.
Wow.
Yeah, and
That's
yeah, he
crazy.
knows them all. He knows every one of them. And I'm like, "Randy, you need to retire and go to work for somebody else and get a new set of crooks." But he knows these crooks. He knows their patterns. He knows what to look for 'em. And so for now, 30 plus years, the same family, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, and you wanna say, "Well, that's what they do." They took over the family business. Well,
Well, and
you think it'd be
yeah, and
smart to go
sometimes
to a
you're
different store.
right, right, exactly. But I do think sometimes it's even culture wise too, because especially like the strategic cargo theft with fraud and stuff like that. Like these people go into like call centers or buildings like call centers, and that's their literal job is
Yeah.
clocking in doing that, and it's so normal and accepted in their culture that it's not like they don't think they're doing anything bad. You know what I mean? Like where here it's a little bit different with our culture and the way we think about things.
Well
Not for
well, I was a
everybody, just like you
probation
said,
officer
but
years ago, okay, a lot of years ago, and
yeah.
and I still remember the very first probationer that I saw actually in the field, and He was on my caseload, um, 3 felony counts for, credit card theft. For some reason, I still remember this guy. I can't ever get him out of my head, right?
Yeah.
And I went and visited him, at his quote job. Long story short was that I realized there were still some issues with him with what I was seeing at his job, and I started talking to him, when he was in the office the next time, and I said, you've got these credit card frauds. Walk me through why you did it. And he literally looked at me and he said, "It's real simple." He said, "In your country, you've said this is illegal. In my country, to your point of the culture, in my
Yeah.
in my country, if I can outsmart you in business, then I'm just smarter than
Yeah.
you. I'm better than
Right.
you, and you should have stopped it so that I couldn't do this." And
Right.
and that was when I had that come to Jesus meeting with him, where I played a part of Jesus without walking on water, and said, "Sorry, buddy,
Yeah.
that's not how it works here." Right. And
Yeah.
long story short, beyond that, we ultimately did put him and another group in prison for the distribution of cocaine and
Mm.
also auto theft because they were doing other things in a different way now. It was all because they thought they could take advantage. And culturally, to your point, their culture said, this is what we do and it's okay.
Right. Yeah, that was just so interesting. And that, like I mentioned earlier, it's important to know that these guys are not just committing one crime. They're doing a bunch of
Yeah.
other crimes. And it's interesting because the way that the rings are, or the organization of the crime rings within cargo theft is very similar to the rings with drug cartels or drug rings, whatever. They're set up similarly. And to me, that's not a coincidence. A lot of them probably are cross pollinating in the different worlds of theft and bad guyness. I don't know, that's not the right word,
Well, they're
but in
using
crime, that's the word.
Yeah, they're using good business models within the criminal establishment is what they're doing. You have
Yeah.
your drug operations, particularly your distributors, who they already know their path of how they're moving their drugs.
Mhm.
It's well established, it's well oiled, it works. What they want to do, just like a trucking company says, I have to move product X from location 1 to location 3, and it's 1,700 miles away. Well, I want to backhaul that trailer back because I don't want it coming back empty, right?
Yeah,
The drug guys do the same thing, right?
right,
I don't want that whatever going back empty. I wanna use every avenue going forward making money, and I want every avenue coming back making money. Some of that is legitimate, and a lot of it's not. But
right,
for them, it's just business, and that's how they approach it and look at it. Their business just happens to be all illegal, or most of it illegal, with
right,
some facade in front to look like a cover,
right,
but even
exactly,
the facade is designed as a cover, therefore it's illegal.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of times they just use that for, like, money laundering and things like that.
absolutely.
So I know you had some things you wanted to show. Do you want to share your screen and
Absolutely, I
show
can
off?
do that. Okay, here we go. So when we look at that, for instance, the cigarette theft, the green dots indicate the just one part of what where these guys had actually already hit in Northern California. And you see it's all over the Bay Area. And you can see clearly how many different cities they were in, therefore how many different jurisdictions, which cross, in this case, several different counties. So you can see some of the problem there. Same group hit Southern California in the same time frame, if you will, and you see some of the places they hit there. Once again, across, in this case, 4 different counties with multiple different cities. And if you look at this one picture here, the one to the left, you can't really see it very well in this picture, but the bottom left ankle of the guy closest to you in the picture, that's our ankle monitor. Okay. And
Mm,
just to give you a little fun, but the tracking devices that we talked about. So the blue indicates the Apple tag, the green indicates a different type of device that was actually installed into the tote itself. These two pictures, this one and then the next one, the red dots indicate every place that our particular criminal was stopping because they were actually selling, because we were filming them, they were actually selling cartons of cigarettes at every one of those red stops.
wow.
So they owned that entire neighborhood and several others. I just give you that as an idea to see the path of how busy these guys are in the aftermath of their cargo theft. They're in it to make money, and they're willing to do the work. If you let me show you something else here. This is one of the recoveries that CHP did. They actually did 4 recoveries that morning. This was the second one. All the boxes you see open, those are cigarettes that belong to my client.
Wow.
The black bags and the white boxes that you see, those were other products stolen from, in this case, 2 different major retailers. You would know their names if I shared it with you, but I'm not. And that was what they also had that they'd stolen inside. the product. But here's part of what we're up against with these guys. Some of their recruitment, this is their online recruitment. First three pictures to your left, where these guys are in different social media platforms talking about how much money they're making. Sign up with me, and guess what? You'll sign up with me, and you'll get this kind of money as well. That's what they're up against. What we're up against
Wow.
every day. The guy on the right, by the way, I just want to talk about the experience piece. The guy on the right, that was one of our two middlemen in this case. He originally, if you go back from 10 years ago, he was arrested and convicted in Richmond, Virginia. You want to guess what for? Yep, cargo theft. Product, 40,000 units of cigarettes. Okay. Did 7 years in federal prison, was
Wow.
released from federal prison, moved to California, and almost immediately became a middleman to this group. Okay. So this is real stuff that really does happen, you know, and these
Yeah.
are we're up against this kind of recruitment, and we're up this type of experience that we have to try to battle and tackle as we look at also new technology, AI, and all these other things. A real challenge for folks, right? And the other thing where is that at? I think one of the things that people need to understand is not knowing who all is going to listen to this is when you look at the numbers, I mean, we're talking, $1 billion a year of cargo theft, right?
Right.
$18 million a day. And I'm going to steal one of Scott's numbers, by the way. $6,000 is your average shipment that's stolen. Okay.
Mhm.
These are big numbers,
Yeah.
and these aren't things that we play around with. And then if you look at, once again, this is somewhere that tracking, but if you look at the goods, there's your breakdown of what they are today. Okay. Food,
Mhm.
electronics, automotive, vehicle parts, and the list goes on, and pharmaceuticals at the bottom of the list. But look at that top really 5 or 6, 7, those are all products that you and I and anyone else, we could go out and sell that stuff all day long,
Right.
right? And make
Yeah.
some good money.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how easy it is to sell stuff, especially like, let's say, like luxury brand, whatever, and putting them on eBay or Facebook Marketplace, or even just having like a pop up shop somewhere. It's so easy to sell something for a lot cheaper, like a Nike shoe, for instance. Like
Yeah.
selling that half off, it's pure profit for you, but and I think also it's important to know, like, your brand gets messed up from it. Your like just the amount of it's not just the load of the cost of the load that the manufacturers and shippers and companies actually take the hit on. It's a lot deeper than that.
We far deeper than that, and there's just so
Yeah,
much to it. But, when you look at all these things, and there's just a lot to it, a lot of technology all of us are using and all that. Also, I wanted to make sure you had all my contact info if anybody needs it or cares,
perfect.
so you have that.
Well, I
We're
appreciate you sharing that.
Not a
Yeah,
problem. I mean, whatever. My thing is real simple. What do we need to do to help? How can I help the industry? How do we help those that there's a lot of companies out there don't that anybody committed to protecting their security and safety of their processes, size,
yeah,
scale, shape, everything. They're basing things on their insurance company and saying, "Hey, look, we're putting all this on insurance and on and on." Well, maybe not. Okay, and and,
yeah,
and then the argument begins when a loss occurs as to who's responsible for what.
yeah. There's a lot of finger pointing.
There is, and it becomes a real issue. And then you have those companies who have operated for years, never had a loss, and now all of a sudden they have a whole trailer stolen or
Yeah,
part of a load stolen, and yet they've had zero turnover of personnel in their company. They've been using the same broker for X amount of years. They've been using the same, and the list goes on. And now
yeah,
they have something, and they're terrified.
right,
And in some cases, their margin is thin enough that it doesn't take but a handful of those before they're done. One of the things I learned
right.
early in my career when I was uh, with a distribution company, uh, we had a number of cargo thefts that occurred, unfortunately. Of course, it's why I got hired. So it's hard for me to complain about it because these criminals have kept me working for a lot of years.
Yeah,
Okay. But I went to work for them and I realized after about the third one, when I was working there, risk management told me we're not reporting this to law enforcement, and we're not reporting it to our insurance carrier. And I said,
right,
"Have you lost your mind?" And they said, "No, no, no. It's an I remember, it's an $80,000 load. We're gonna write it off. We're just gonna eat it because if we report it, it will up our premiums, and it will
right.
change what we can and can't do," and on and on and on. And that was a real education to me internally. And I've
Yeah,
seen that continue over all these years with companies and understand it's unfortunately, is part of the equation, but it also says then that those very numbers that we have for actual losses.
Are far greater.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and those
Yeah.
numbers are pretty staggering as it is,
Mhm.
but that's
Yeah,
actually
I
worse.
yeah, totally. I think we're getting better about reporting, and we're not so scared and fearful of repercussions, but that's why I feel like the number kind of is keeps going up, but also I know theft keeps going up too. So it's definitely like a who really knows what's going on, but it is so important to report it. I know somebody I had on the show actually was talking about, you reporting it at least shows like these are the heat map markets, right? Like whenever a driver's driving through and then they see like, oh, well, this is actually like a hotbed for I can't stop at truck stops around here because this is a hotbed for theft. Like knowing that information, even if it's not, helping you and your stolen load, it can help other people. I think that's what people need to step back and realize that we're all in this together. So
Well, and some of that allows us also, like we do a lot of consulting, and I know with some of the transportation companies, I'm able to then go in with that type data and ask them, okay, look, you're moving this high value load or even a medium value load from X to Y. Do you understand the path you're taking takes it through a significantly heavy cargo theft area? And granted, it's going to cost you more to go an hour and a half out of the way, but you've improved your chances of not being a victim by
right,
60, 70, 80%. Um, Therefore, it probably is a better route to go. Some will listen to
right,
that and adhere to it, and some, quite frankly, will not, you know,
yeah,
and that's just company decisions. But we owe it to them to tell them and give them the best information. And, it's the old thing of garbage in, garbage out, right? And
hmm
the better we're all putting in as professionals into the database, the better the rest of us can pull it out and then try to educate people so that bad things don't happen.
yeah. I think the biggest thing right now is education. People need to be aware that even if it has happened to you, it's not really a like a if it's a win type thing, and at least you need to be prepared and know what to do. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's why I like to have people on here on the show, and I really appreciate you coming on. It means a lot that you can, share your knowledge and your expertise and kind of do like kind of like I mentioned earlier before we hopped on. Like I want this to be kind of like a pulse check, like what actually is going on in the industry, and then let's get into like crime fighting skills and stuff like that. Because there's a lot that we could do to prevent things, but I think the biggest thing is when something does happen, knowing what to do too. And obviously, that's calling you and your team. What areas do you cover? Are you all throughout the U.S. or
We're
what's your
across the
main?
US as well as international.
Okay.
Most of what we do is domestic, but we do a lot of international work, particularly in the area of protection. And we do a lot of things. I mean, we do investigations, surveillance, we do workplace protection, executive protection is a big one, particularly
Yeah.
in light of things that have happened over the last many years. And then we do a lot of security and security assessments as well. But yeah, we're all over the place, and I have folks all over. And then I've got to give you a commercial here. When I'm not doing that, I'm writing books, and so this is the most recent one, The Adulterer. It's fiction, by the way. Okay? And it's, investigative cases of adultery.
Okay.
It does go across the country, and yes, actually, there is one case that's in your good city of Atlanta. But remember, it's fiction, okay?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we're all over the place, and we're where our customers need us. My thing is real simple. To somebody calls me and says, "Can you do X?" and can you do this location? If we cannot do it, I'm going to tell them we can't do it, and try to find us somebody who can, or say,
Yeah.
this is how we would do it. And that tends to help people because I don't wanna blow smoke at them and then not be able to
Right.
deliver.
Yeah.
But the pockets for the cargo theft, we're still seeing them happen in all those same places,
Yeah.
and they're big places.
Definitely. We'll see. I'm praying 2026 is the year we're going to start seeing a downward trend, but we'll see. The
I
market's
think the answer to
tightening and
that
it'll
is
be interesting.
how many people did we get adjudicated last year that have committed stuff over the last 3? And
Yeah.
if we have a big enough impact there, we normally see a trend for a few years where it decreases, uh, till those guys get out or until those guys have had time to train others who are in prison. Then you go back to that
Yeah.
recruitment method, and this thing just continues to cycle through. But
Well,
with these
I
these
think it's,
guys today, they're smart. I mean, they are smart. There's no doubt
yeah.
about it.
I mean, yeah, this is it, like their job, and I think that's a good point. Like when they get out, it's such a these guys go right back in it, so it's wild. But I appreciate. I'm gonna throw up all your information at the very end, again, like your little slide, and then that way people can reach you. But I really appreciate your time, and thanks so much for coming on the show. We'll have to do a part two of this somewhere down the line this year, and see what other new things you're seeing because
You
that's
let
how
me know.
we,
I'm here to help.
education's big.
Whatever we
Love
can do
it.
to help,
Thanks,
and
Rod.
then maybe we'll run into you at one of the conferences this year, okay?
Yeah, definitely. That'd be great if we did.
Alright,
Awesome. Well,
stay out of trouble.
thanks everybody.